The night was cool, and the streets of the city were alive with the hum of cars and the occasional chatter of pedestrians. Maya Carter, a 22-year-old college senior, had just left a peaceful protest downtown. She had been one of the many voices, speaking out against police brutality, a cause she cared deeply about. Holding a small sign that read, "Justice for All," Maya felt a sense of purpose as she walked alongside her friends, their voices echoing through the quiet evening. As the protest wound down, Maya decided to head home. She lived only a few miles away, so she hopped into her car and started driving. Her mind was still buzzing with thoughts from the rally, how important it was to keep fighting for fairness and equality. But those thoughts were interrupted when she noticed flashing blue and red lights behind her. Confused, Maya pulled over to the side of the road. She hadn't been speeding or breaking any traffic rules, so why was she being stopped? Officer Greg Monroe approached her car with an air of authority. His face was stern, his eyes scanning the interior of her vehicle. He asked for her license and registration, which Maya handed over without hesitation. She greeted him politely, trying to stay calm despite feeling uneasy. Something about the way he looked at her made her stomach tighten, but she reminded herself to remain respectful. Monroe studied her documents carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he began asking questions. "What were you doing downtown? Tonight?" he asked, his tone sharp. Maya explained that she'd attended a peaceful protest, emphasizing that it was lawful and organized. Monroe nodded slowly, but didn't seem satisfied. He leaned closer to her window, squinting slightly. "You know, we've had reports of suspicious activity in this area lately," he said, "and you fit the description." Maya blinked in disbelief. "Suspicious activity? What does that even mean?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. Monroe ignored her question and instead accused her of acting nervously during the stop. "Why are your hands shaking?" he demanded, pointing at her fingers gripping the steering wheel. In truth, Maya's hands weren't shaking, not until now. The tension between them was growing thicker by the second. Things escalated quickly after that. When Maya questioned whether she was being singled out unfairly, Monroe grew defensive. He claimed she was being uncooperative and insisted on searching her car. Though Maya knew she had nothing to hide, she also knew her rights. She politely declined, explaining that he needed probable cause before conducting a search. This only seemed to irritate Monroe further. His patience wore thin, and soon he declared that she was under arrest for disorderly conduct. Shocked and confused, Maya couldn't believe what was happening. Disorderly conduct? For what? She hadn't raised her voice or done anything aggressive. Still, Monroe handcuffed her and placed her in the back of his patrol car. As they drove to the station, Maya stared out the window, her heart pounding. How could this be real? She replayed the events in her mind, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. Was it because she dared to ask questions, or was it something else entirely? At the station, Maya sat quietly in a holding cell, waiting for someone to process her paperwork. She tried calling her father, Mayor Derek Carter, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Little did she know he was in the middle of a critical city council meeting where all electronic devices were banned. Frustrated but determined to stay strong, Maya leaned back against the cold metal bench and closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, who always told her to stand tall no matter what life threw her way. Despite the injustice of the situation, Maya refused to let fear consume her. She reminded herself that she wasn't alone, that there were people who loved her and believed in her. And though she didn't realize it yet, she was about to discover just how powerful her voice could be. For now, however, she focused on staying calm and preparing for whatever came next. After all, she'd faced challenges before, and she knew she could handle this one too. Minutes turned into hours and the fluorescent lights above buzzed incessantly. Maya used the time to reflect on why she'd joined the protest in the first place. It wasn't just about raising awareness, it was about creating change. If anything, this experience would only strengthen her resolve. She vowed to use every moment of this ordeal to fight back against the unfairness she was witnessing firsthand. Finally, a bailiff arrived to take her fingerprints and mugshot. Maya cooperated silently, knowing that arguing wouldn't help her case. Once the formalities were complete, she was allowed to make another phone call. This time she reached her best friend, Tessa, who promised to alert her family immediately. Relief washed over Maya as she hung up the phone. Help was on the way. Though she didn't know it yet, Maya's arrest was about to set off a chain of events that would shake the entire city. From the courtroom to the mayor's office, her story would spark conversations, inspire movements, and hold those in power accountable. But for now, she simply waited, her spirit unbroken, and her hope unwavering. The courtroom was a place Maya had never imagined herself being in, at least not like this. It was a modest room with wooden benches that creaked under the weight of those sitting on them. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a scent that somehow made the space feel both official and intimidating. People shuffled in quietly, finding their seats as the bailiff called for order. At the front of the room sat the judge, a stern-looking woman with glasses perched on her nose, flipping through papers while waiting for the proceedings to begin. Maya entered the room dressed in a crisp white blouse and navy blue blazer, her hair neatly styled in a bun. She wanted to look professional, to show that she took this seriously. Beside her stood her public defender, Mr. Harris, a kind but overworked man who had been assigned to her case. He had listened carefully as Maya explained what had happened during her arrest, nodding along and taking notes. Though he seemed competent enough, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the odds were stacked against her. After all, it wasn't just her word against Officer Monroe's, it was her word against someone wearing a badge. As the hearing began, Officer Greg Monroe took the stand first. He walked up confidently, adjusting his uniform as he settled into the witness chair. His demeanor was calm, almost too calm, as if he believed nothing could touch him here. The prosecutor asked him questions about the night of the arrest, prompting him to recount his version of events. Monroe spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. He described Maya as agitated and uncooperative, painting a picture of someone deliberately trying to provoke him. At one point, he paused mid-sentence, glancing toward Maya with a subtle smirk. It was barely noticeable, a slight twitch of his lips, but it didn't escape her notice. That smirk said everything. Arrogance, dismissal, superiority. To him, Maya was just another young black woman who wouldn't be taken seriously, no matter how eloquent or composed she might appear. She felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Losing her temper wouldn't help her case. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris scribbled furiously on his notepad, jotting down points to address later. When it came time for cross-examination, he stood up and approached the stand. "Officer Monroe," he began, his tone polite but firm. "You mentioned that my client appeared nervous. Can you explain exactly what behavior led you to that conclusion?" Monroe hesitated for a moment before replying. Well, she kept moving her hands around on the steering wheel, and when I asked her questions, she seemed hesitant to answer." Mr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. "Hesitant, or perhaps cautious, given the circumstances, wouldn't it be reasonable for someone to want to ensure they're answering correctly, especially when interacting with law enforcement?" Monroe shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I suppose so, but—" And regarding the supposed nervousness, Mr. Harris interrupted smoothly. "Did you observe any other signs typically associated with anxiety, such as rapid breathing or sweating?" "No," Monroe admitted reluctantly, "but her behavior still struck me as suspicious." "Suspicious," Mr. Harris repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Would you agree that suspicious is a subjective term, open to interpretation based on personal biases?" Before Monroe could respond, the judge interjected. "Counselor, please stick to the facts." "Yes, Your Honor," Mr. Harris replied, bowing slightly before returning to his seat. Though the exchange hadn't landed a knockout blow, Maya could see cracks forming in Monroe's confident facade. Still, she knew there was more work to do. When it was her turn to speak, Maya rose from her seat and stepped forward. Her heart raced as all eyes turned to her, but she reminded herself to breathe deeply and focus. Standing in front of the judge, she began to tell her side of the story. She described how she had been pulled over without cause, how Monroe had questioned her unnecessarily, and how the situation had escalated despite her efforts to remain respectful. Her voice was steady, her words clear and deliberate. "I understand that officers have a difficult job," she said, looking directly at Monroe. "But no one deserves to be treated unfairly simply because of how they look or where they come from. I was exercising my constitutional rights to attend a peaceful protest, to ask questions, and to refuse an unlawful search, and yet I'm here today, facing charges that shouldn't exist." The courtroom fell silent as her words sank in. Even Monroe seemed momentarily stunned, his earlier smirk replaced by a frown. For the first time since the trial began, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the truth would prevail. But then, something unexpected happened. The courtroom doors swung open with a loud creak, drawing everyone's attention. Reporters poured in, cameras flashing as they jockeyed for position. Behind them strode Mayor Derek Carter, his presence commanding immediate respect. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as he made his way to Maya's side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. For a brief moment, Maya froze. She hadn't expected her father to arrive like this. Not here, not now. But seeing him there gave her strength, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. As the reporters snapped photos and whispered among themselves, Maya glanced at Monroe, whose face had gone pale. The smirk was long gone, replaced by wide-eyed shock as he realized who exactly he'd underestimated. The judge banged her gavel sharply, calling for order. "This court is in session," she declared, though her voice wavered slightly under the chaos. The mayor leaned down to whisper something in Maya's ear, his expression unreadable but reassuring. Whatever he said, it filled her with renewed determination. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed situations like hers to happen in the first place. Though the hearing wasn't over yet, Maya knew the tide had begun to turn. With her father by her side and the media watching closely, she felt a sense of empowerment she hadn't experienced before. What started as a routine court appearance was quickly transforming into something much bigger, a chance to shine a light on injustice and demand accountability. And as the judge adjourned the session temporarily, Maya couldn't help but smile. For the first time in days, she felt like she had the upper hand. The courtroom doors burst open with a force that startled everyone inside. Reporters flooded in, their cameras clicking furiously as they scanned the room for the source of the commotion. Behind them stood Mayor Derek Carter, his tall frame commanding attention as he entered with an air of authority. His sharp suit and tie were impeccable, but it was the fire in his eyes that silenced the murmurs spreading through the room. Every head turned toward him, including Officer Greg Monroe's, whose face went pale almost instantly. Mayor Carter didn't waste time. He walked straight to Maya's side, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. The gesture was protective, but it also carried a message loud and clear. This young woman wasn't alone. She had someone powerful standing beside her, someone who wouldn't tolerate injustice quietly. Maya looked up at her father, her heart swelling with gratitude and relief. Though she hadn't expected him to arrive like this, his presence gave her strength. For the first time since the arrest, she felt truly supported. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "This court is in session," she shouted over the noise. "Quiet down immediately." Slowly, the reporters settled into their seats, though their cameras continued to flash intermittently. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone seemed to sense that something monumental was unfolding. Mayor Carter leaned down slightly and whispered to Maya. "I'm here now," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You did nothing wrong. Let's finish this together." His words reassured her, grounding her in the moment. She nodded, feeling a surge of determination replace the anxiety that had been gnawing at her insides. Meanwhile, Officer Monroe sat stiffly in the witness chair, his earlier confidence crumbling before everyone's eyes. He glanced nervously between the mayor and the reporters, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. His smirk, the one that had infuriated Maya earlier, was long gone, replaced by a look of dread. It was evident that he hadn't anticipated this turn of events. To him, Maya had just been another nameless individual caught in the system. Now she was the daughter of one of the most influential figures in the city. The judge called for a brief recess, instructing everyone to step outside while she conferred privately with both legal teams. As the courtroom emptied, reporters swarmed around Mayor Carter, peppering him with questions. "Mayor Carter, what brings you here today?" one asked. Another chimed in. "Is it true your daughter was wrongfully arrested?" The mayor held up a hand, signaling for silence. "I'll address these matters shortly," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "For now, let me be clear. My daughter has done nothing wrong, and I will not stand idly by while false accusations are leveled against her. Justice must prevail, not just for her but for everyone who faces unfair treatment in our justice system." His statement sent ripples through the crowd. Some people nodded approvingly while others exchanged shocked glances. The reporters scrambled to capture every word, knowing they were witnessing something significant. Meanwhile, Maya stood quietly, beside her father, watching the scene unfold. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but instead of fear, she felt resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about using her platform to speak out against systemic issues that affected countless others. When the recess ended, the judge reconvened the hearing. She addressed the courtroom solemnly, acknowledging the unexpected developments. "Given the circumstances," she said, "and upon reviewing the evidence presented thus far, I see no grounds to continue pursuing charges against Ms. Carter. All charges are hereby dismissed." A wave of relief washed over Maya as the judge's words sank in. Her shoulders relaxed and she exhaled deeply, feeling as though a heavy burden had been lifted off her chest. Beside her, Mr. Harris smiled faintly, nodding in satisfaction. Even the bailiff, who had remained stoic throughout the proceedings, allowed himself a small smile. But the story wasn't over yet. Outside the courtroom, Mayor Carter wasted no time addressing the media. With Maya standing proudly beside him, he delivered a passionate speech about accountability and reform. "What happened to my daughter is unacceptable," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "No one should be targeted or mistreated based on their race, gender, or background. We need to hold those in positions of power accountable when they abuse it. And we need to ensure that our justice system works fairly for everyone." His words resonated deeply, especially among the reporters and bystanders who had gathered to witness the drama unfold. Many took notes furiously, eager to share the story with the public. Social media platforms lit up within minutes, with hashtags like "Justice for Maya" trending rapidly. People across the city, and even beyond, were talking about what had happened, outraged by the injustice Maya had faced and inspired by her courage. Officer Monroe, meanwhile, found himself cornered by internal affairs investigators almost immediately after leaving the courthouse. The media coverage had put immense pressure on the police department to act swiftly. They couldn't ignore the allegations of misconduct any longer, not when the mayor himself was calling for answers. Monroe stammered through his explanations, visibly shaken as he recounted the events leading up to Maya's arrest. His excuses sounded hollow even to his own ears. Back at home later that evening, Maya reflected on everything that had transpired. Sitting in her living room with her family, she replayed the day's events in her mind. It had been overwhelming, exhausting, and emotionally draining, but also empowering. She realized that her experience, though painful, had given her a unique opportunity to make a difference. Her father joined her on the couch, placing a comforting arm around her shoulders. "You handled yourself beautifully today," he said, pride shining in his eyes. "You showed incredible strength and grace under pressure." "Thanks, Dad," Maya replied, leaning into his embrace. "But this isn't just about me. There are so many others who don't have someone like you to step in and help them." That's why I want to keep fighting for them." Mayor Carter nodded, understanding completely. "Then we'll fight together," he promised, "and we'll use this moment to push for real change." As the night wore on, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a wrongful arrest had transformed into a catalyst for action. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it head-on. With her family's support and her own unshakable determination, she vowed to turn her personal struggle into a movement for justice, a movement that would resonate far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The days following the courtroom hearing felt like a whirlwind for Maya. The media coverage of her case had exploded, with headlines dominating local news outlets and social media platforms alike. Reporters dissected every detail of the incident, from Officer Greg Monroe's smug demeanor during his testimony to Mayor Derek Carter's dramatic entrance into the courtroom. People across the city and even beyond were talking about what had happened. For many, it was yet another example of systemic injustice, while for others, it was a rallying cry for change. Officer Monroe found himself at the center of an intense, internal investigation led by the police department's Internal Affairs Division. Detectives combed through his records, reviewing past cases where similar accusations of misconduct had been made but never fully addressed. Witnesses who had interacted with Monroe in the past were contacted, and their testimonies painted a troubling picture. One woman recounted how Monroe had pulled her over late at night, accusing her of being involved in drug activity simply because she was parked outside her own apartment building. Another man described how Monroe had mocked him during a routine traffic stop, making racially charged comments under the guise of humor. As the evidence mounted, Monroe grew increasingly agitated. He tried to defend himself, insisting that he had always followed protocol and acted in good faith, but his explanations sounded hollow, especially when confronted with inconsistencies in his reports. For instance, the official record of Maya's arrest included details that directly contradicted Monroe's account in court. The discrepancies weren't minor. They were glaring enough to raise serious questions about his credibility. Meanwhile, the public outcry continued to grow. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Accountability now," and "Justice for Maya." Activists amplified their voices online, organizing petitions demanding not only Monroe's termination, but also broader reforms within the police department. Even some of Monroe's colleagues began distancing themselves from him, realizing that standing by his side could damage their own reputations. Mayor Carter played a pivotal role in keeping the pressure on. In press conferences and interviews, he called for transparency and accountability, emphasizing that no one, not even law enforcement officers, was above the law. "If we want trust between our communities and the police, we must hold everyone accountable," he said during one particularly powerful speech. "That means investigating wrongdoing thoroughly and taking decisive action when necessary." Behind the scenes, Maya worked closely with her father and a team of legal experts to ensure that the investigation remained fair and unbiased. Though she appreciated the support pouring in from strangers, she knew that true justice required more than just public outrage. It needed concrete steps to prevent similar incidents from happening again. She spent hours drafting proposals for policy changes, focusing on areas like implicit bias training, body camera regulations, and stricter oversight of police conduct. One evening, as Maya sat at her desk surrounded by papers and notes, Tessa walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You've been working nonstop," Tessa said, setting 1 cup down beside Maya. "Take a break before you burn out." Maya smiled faintly, rubbing her temples. "I can't stop now," she replied. "This is too important. If we don't push for real change right now, all of this attention will fade and nothing will improve." Tessa nodded sympathetically. "I get it. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself, okay?" Maya promised, though she wasn't sure she'd follow through. Her mind was consumed with ideas and strategies, each one fueling her determination to make a difference. She envisioned town hall meetings where community members could voice their concerns directly to police leadership. She imagined workshops where officers learned de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. And she dreamed of a future where young black women like herself wouldn't have to fear being targeted simply for existing. Weeks later, the results of the internal investigation were announced. Officer Monroe was found guilty of multiple violations, including falsifying reports, racial profiling, and abuse of power. He was immediately suspended without pay, pending further disciplinary action. Not long after, criminal charges were filed against him, ensuring that his actions would be scrutinized in a court of law once again, but this time as the defendant. The announcement sent shockwaves through the city. While some celebrated the decision as a victory for justice, others expressed cautious optimism, knowing that one officer's punishment wouldn't erase decades of systemic issues. Still, it was a start, a crack in the wall that Maya hoped would widen into lasting reform. In response to the growing demand for change, Mayor Carter spearheaded a series of initiatives aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community. He partnered with advocacy groups to create a civilian review board tasked with overseeing police conduct. This board would have the authority to investigate complaints independently and recommend disciplinary actions, ensuring that accountability wasn't left solely in the hands of the police department. Additionally, the mayor pushed for mandatory body cameras for all officers, along with strict guidelines on when and how footage could be reviewed. He also proposed increased funding for programs designed to address the root causes of crime, such as poverty, lack of education, and unemployment. By tackling these underlying issues, he believed the city could reduce reliance on policing as a solution to social problems. Maya threw herself into promoting these initiatives, using her newfound platform to speak at rallies, write op-eds, and meet with policymakers. Her story resonated deeply with people from all walks of life, inspiring them to join the fight for justice. Young activists looked up to her as a role model, while seasoned advocates praised her ability to channel personal pain into collective progress. Despite the challenges ahead, Maya felt hopeful. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were moments when doubt crept in. But every time she saw someone step forward to share their own experience, or heard about another success in the push for reform, she reminded herself why she kept going. Change didn't happen overnight, but it started with courage. The courage to speak out, to stand firm, and to believe in a better future. Months had passed since the courtroom drama unfolded, and Maya's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. What began as a personal ordeal had grown into a citywide movement for justice and reform. The media coverage of her case had sparked conversations far beyond the walls of that courthouse, igniting a wave of activism that swept through communities. People from all walks of life, students, teachers, business owners, and activists, came together to demand accountability and meaningful change. Officer Greg Monroe's fate was finally sealed when he stood trial for his misconduct. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Falsified reports, inconsistent testimonies, and multiple accounts from past victims who had been too afraid to speak up before. In the end, Monroe was convicted on several counts, including abuse of power and racial profiling. He lost not only his job, but also faced prison time, serving as a stark reminder that no one was above the law. For many, his conviction felt like a small victory, a step toward addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. But Maya knew better than anyone that convicting one officer wasn't enough. It was just the beginning of a much larger fight. She often thought about those who didn't have the resources or connections she did, the ones whose stories might never make headlines. That's why she refused to let the momentum fade. If anything, she worked harder, determined to turn this moment into lasting impact. With her father's support, Maya launched a foundation called Voices for Justice. Its mission was simple, yet powerful: to advocate for marginalized communities, hold institutions accountable, and push for reforms that would create a fairer society. The foundation quickly gained traction, attracting volunteers, donors, and partners eager to contribute to its cause. They organized workshops, hosted panel discussions, and collaborated with schools to educate young people about their rights. One of their flagship programs focused on training community members to document incidents of police misconduct safely and effectively, empowering them to be watchdogs in their neighborhoods. Maya also became a prominent voice in policy circles, testifying at city council meetings and advising lawmakers on criminal justice reform. Her insights were shaped not only by her personal experience but also by countless conversations with others who had faced similar injustices. She pushed for measures like mandatory de-escalation training for officers, stricter guidelines around use of force policies, and independent oversight boards to review complaints against law enforcement. Many of these proposals were met with resistance, especially from those resistant to change, but Maya remained undeterred. She understood that progress often required persistence. Her efforts weren't limited to policing either. Recognizing that crime and inequality were deeply intertwined, Maya advocated for investments in education, healthcare, and economic opportunities for underserved communities. "You can't solve problems with handcuffs alone," she said during a televised interview. "We need to address the root causes of injustice if we truly want to build a safer and more equitable society." As Maya's influence grew, so did her confidence. Gone was the uncertainty she'd felt during her arrest. In its place was a fierce determination to challenge the status quo. She learned how to navigate complex systems, build coalitions, and inspire others to join her cause. Her speeches became rallying cries, drawing standing ovations at rallies and conferences. People admired not just her eloquence, but also her authenticity. Maya didn't pretend to have all the answers. She simply shared her truth and invited others to do the same. One of the most rewarding aspects of her journey was connecting with individuals whose lives had been touched by her work. At a town hall meeting organized by Voices for Justice, a young woman named Jasmine approached Maya after the event. "I was scared to report what happened to me," Jasmine confessed, tears welling up in her eyes. "But hearing your story gave me the courage to speak out." Moments like these reminded Maya why she kept going, even when the work felt overwhelming. Despite her successes, Maya faced challenges along the way. Some critics dismissed her as naive, accusing her of being overly idealistic. Others argued that her privileged background, being the mayor's daughter, made it easier for her to succeed, implying that her advocacy wasn't genuine. While these comments stung, Maya chose to focus on the bigger picture. "Yes, I'm lucky to have certain advantages," she admitted during a podcast appearance, "but that doesn't mean I shouldn't use them to help others. Privilege should never be an excuse to stay silent." Her father, Mayor Derek Carter, watched proudly as Maya carved out her own path. Though he initially worried about the toll this fight might take on her, he soon realized that activism was where she belonged. He supported her in every way he could, whether by amplifying her message or simply listening when she needed to vent. Their bond deepened through shared purpose, transforming them from father and daughter into teammates united by a common goal. By the end of the year, Maya's impact was undeniable. The reforms she championed had begun to take shape, with new policies implemented across the city. Body cameras became standard equipment for officers, and civilian review boards gained real authority to investigate complaints. Schools introduced programs teaching students about civil rights and civic engagement, ensuring that the next generation would grow up informed and empowered. Most importantly, people started talking openly about issues they once avoided, issues like racism, inequality, and accountability. Looking back, Maya marveled at how far she'd come. From the frightened young woman sitting in a holding cell to the confident leader standing at podiums, she had grown in ways she never expected. But she knew the journey was far from over. There was still so much work to be done, not just in her city, but across the country and beyond. And while she couldn't predict what the future held, she was ready to face it head-on. On a quiet evening, Maya sat on her balcony, sipping tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. Tessa joined her, pulling up a chair. "You've changed so much," Tessa said, smiling. "Not that you weren't amazing before, but now, you're unstoppable." Maya laughed softly. "I don't know about unstoppable," she replied. "But I do know one thing. I won't stop fighting until everyone gets the justice they deserve." Tessa nodded, raising her cup in a mock toast. "To justice, then." "To justice," Maya echoed, clinking her cup against Tessa's. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Maya allowed herself a moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference. But for now, she savored the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her voice and the voices of so many others had sparked a movement that refused to be silenced.